Hello, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us on our fourth season of Claims Corner. 4 seasons.
Fourth season.
Wow, it's flown
First
by.
episode. It's gone by very quickly.
Yes.
It's gone by. It's great. It's great though that we're able to do this fourth season, just with all the information and everything, and being able to broadcast out and get this information out to everybody. It's fantastic.
It's great to see you.
It's good to see you too.
Yeah. For those of you that don't know me, I'm David James, the property training manager here at CNC. This handsome young fella next to me is the one and only Craig Fowler.
You got two things wrong.
Oh.
Two things wrong. One, I'm not young, and I'm really good looking, not just handsome. So.
Okay. Good point. For those of you that have participated in the past, there may be some folks out there that are new. Just want to reiterate the goal of Claims Corner here is to bring exciting and current information to you in regards to the claim industry through a variety of leaders, subject matter experts. We want to keep you informed. Very excited about the agenda that we have planned for this year. Some of the topics besides today, it's going to be, we're going to have speakers come in from IBHS. They're going to talk about fortified homes. Mm-hmm. Also, we're going to have Night Solutions, a partner with us. They're going to come in and talk about how shingles are manufactured.
Which I think is, even on the flood side, I think that's really interesting to just understand what goes into that process.
Right.
Because that's one of the things about Claims Corner, which we're always bringing these subject matter experts to talk about things that sometimes people just don't understand. You know, you go out there and you're adjusting a claim, you're looking at stuff, and you don't really understand how that's actually supposed to apply. When you can really get in the depths of the product,
right,
understanding things, then you understand how it actually can be damaged.
Exactly.
A little bit better.
Exactly.
So.
It's made to withstand certain things or how it's made, like you said, and then, you know, mm-hmm. how it can be damaged if it's storm-related or not, if it's a defect. So.
All right, before we get started, though, I do want to make an announcement. Can I make an announcement?
You always interrupt me, so go ahead.
Well, it's time to.
Okay.
It's time
sure,
to.
Whatever.
So I just want to make a quick announcement. So May 2nd through May 4th is our CNC Connect Conference. It's going to be here in Mobile, Alabama. If you have not gotten your registered, gotten your tickets yet, please do so immediately. I know spaces are filling up pretty quickly. You can go to our register at cncconnectconference.com. We do have an early bird special going on right now. Has it ended yet? It says January 16th. We might have already ended that, but I think it's still going on. So, yeah, but definitely get in there. It's going to be a great conference. I'm really looking forward to this conference. We have some fantastic speakers like we do with this Claims Corner. We're going to have some great speakers. We're going to have representatives from FEMA, from OST, from property, from flood clients, some dynamic speakers. We'll have Xactimate. We'll have Veris. We'll have engineers. We have a lot of speakers and presenters who want to be a part of this conference. So we've been really pushing the agenda, trying to figure out where we're going to fit everybody, but it's really, really excited about this fully packed agenda. And we'll also have an expo where we'll have a lot of our exhibitors that will be able to talk about their products and showcase some of their things. And we'll also have some of our own little businesses there to talk about, showcase some of that. So we're really looking forward to that. So definitely do not, if you're in town, don't miss it. If you're out of town, don't miss it. It's going to be a great opportunity to network with the CNC family, with some of our clients, and really learn about some of the things we're fully implementing this year from the claims process from both property and flood. A lot of things we've been working on here at CNC and some of our products we've been working on to really showcase those and get our adjusters, get you all, suited, ready to roll, ready for deployment. It's been a great opportunity at our CNC Connect conference. You do not want to miss out on that. So,
what did you say the price was again?
Right now, it's like $99. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
For all that information, I was telling somebody earlier.
Oh yeah. Oh, we do. We also have certifications, NFIP recertification going on. We have some fast track certifications going on. Some client certifications, auto certification. I believe we're having. We have a lot of information. So yeah, it's really, really good opportunity to gather some really good information and be ready. Be ready to run with us because we're making a lot of changes, and we want you to be a part of those changes because we are making these changes for the better for you all to make sure we're all ready to run a good, smooth claims operation. So anyway, let's get to Claims Corner.
Okay.
That's what we're here for.
Sorry about that. All right. Today's session topic is 2022 Atlantic hurricane season. A recap of it, looking into it, what we learned, and also what 2023 may look like. Very interesting. So before we start, I want to kick it over to Julie for some logistics, some reminders and different things. Julie, are you out there?
Yes.
Hey, there you are.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back or welcome to Claims Corner if you're here for the first time. My name's Julie, and I will be watching the comment box that is listed under your screen in CNC Pro. You can put your questions in there that you have for Hal, and I will be asking those at the end of his presentation. And I will see you then.
Thanks, Julie. All right. Let's wait no further. Our guest speaker, the very own Dr. Hal Needham. Hal, you're out there?
I am, David, Craig, Julie. Thank you so much for the warm introduction. Really great to connect with y'all. I'm coming to y'all from our GeoTrek studios out here in Galveston, Texas. I can't believe it's time for another Claims Corner, right? It just seems like just last year we were talking about storm season. I hope everyone had a great holiday season. If you're along the Gulf South, holiday season still hasn't ended. We're right in the middle of Mardi Gras, right? It never seems to end down here. But wherever you're tuning in today, really glad to have you interact with us. We're going to be talking about the science, looking back at last hurricane season, what we can expect this upcoming hurricane season. And again, send those questions to Julie. Let's keep it interactive. I'm going to share my screen here and we'll rock and roll. As always, we'll keep it high energy, pretty dynamic, and hopefully have a really good discussion here this afternoon. I'm just sharing my screen there. And going to bounce over here and rock and roll on our presentation. Again, we're going to be talking about last year and looking ahead at this next year as well. A pretty simple presentation. The overview of the presentation today, going to be looking back at last year's Atlantic hurricane season, looking at lessons learned from Hurricane Ian, a Category 4 hurricane that struck Southwest Florida and then got out in the Atlantic and struck South Carolina as a Cat 1 hurricane about a week later. And then we're going to take a sneak peek at this upcoming 2023 Atlantic hurricane season as well. So looking back at last year, my friend Phil Klotzbach, he made the comment, he said the 2022 Atlantic hurricane season was the most abnormal normal season. This was just on a video call. This wasn't an official quote or anything. We were just chatting one day. And he said, last year's hurricane season was the most abnormal normal season. This is just in a conversation we had. And I think this is what he meant. So when we look at the numbers for last year's hurricane season, we had 14 named storms, 8 hurricanes, and 2 major hurricanes. That aligned very closely with the 30-year climatological average of 14, 7, and 3. It was a bit of a surprise. Most of the models were suggesting a really active hurricane season, more like maybe 18 or 19 named storms. Instead, we only got 14. So by the numbers, we lined up really very close to where we should be. But in some ways, it didn't feel like a normal hurricane season at all. For one, it was coming off of 2 very hyperactive seasons. The 2020 season was the most active season on record as far as the number of named storms. We had 30 named storms in the Atlantic in 2020. And then the following year, 2021, we had 21 named storms. So we had 51 named storms in 2020 and 2021. Coming off of that, 2022 felt very inactive, even though climatologically, our numbers ended up pretty normal. It's just, we were not at like the 5th or 6th named storm by early July, like we were in some of these previous seasons. The other thing that was really weird about last hurricane season in the Atlantic is that we had this long, really lull of inactivity from July 4th until August 31st. There were no named storms. That includes the entire month of August in what was forecast to be a very active hurricane season. So that's pretty rare. Since the modern era of hurricane records began back in 1851, we only have 4 other Augusts that were completely silent with no named storms. That's 1929, 1941, 1961, in 1997. So this was a bit of a rare season, and it left a lot of people asking, especially as we got to mid and late August, what in the world is happening? How are there no name storms out there in the Atlantic? That's something that researchers are looking into now. I think there'll be really interesting conference talks and papers published about that. Something that came out in some of the media and some of the interviews last year was that we really had below normal instability in the Atlantic basin. So to get a hurricane, you really need a cluster of thunderstorms. We need that convection. We need that rising air where those thunderstorms really billow up. That starts sucking air to the middle of the cluster, and it starts this whole cycle where you can generate a tropical cyclone. Last year, there was an interesting article in the Washington Post on August 25th that started plotting this out and seeing that the instability, these thunderstorms firing in the Atlantic, was actually quite a bit lower than normal. And so it seemed like one of the reasons for that may have been more dry air in the atmosphere than normal. Again, you need a moist environment. You need a lot of evaporation and condensation to get tropical cyclones to form. And it seemed like there was quite a bit of dry air out there last year. Again, that will be researched, that'll be talked about, and hopefully put into the models to improve our forecasting in the future. I know one of the things that came up a lot in the media was that Sahara air layer. And this isn't anything new or that unusual. We have these east to west winds that follow basically the trade winds that come off of the African continent, and they can actually track across the Atlantic some of the Sahara air dust, these really dry layers of air kind of in the middle layers of the atmosphere. They can track all the way to the Caribbean and even to North America. Sometimes we'll see these milky white sunsets, especially in like late spring or early summer along the Gulf Coast. That can actually be Sahara air dust that makes it all the way to us. It seemed like we had some pretty big outbreaks last year. Again, the researchers will put that in context and understand if that's a trend that's increasing or not. But something interesting, if you want to learn more about this topic, I'm involved on the science panel of the National Tropical Weather Conference every week during hurricane season. And I helped to interview Jason Dunyan last year. And there's a link there to the podcast that we did. This was an interview that we had last hurricane season called Going Where No Hurricane Hunter Has Gone Before. This was a conversation we had with Jason, but the hurricane hunters. So we know that the U.S. government flies airplanes into hurricanes to take observations. The hurricane hunters went farther east than ever before. They went all the way over here to the Cape Verde Islands last year to take observations, again, related to this dry air coming off of Africa. And so we know that has an influence on tropical cyclones in the Atlantic. And actually, the hurricane hunters went as far east as the Cape Verde Islands last year to take observations. The hurricane hunters have never gone that far east before. You can hear our interview with Jason Dunyan right there on the National Tropical Weather Conference. We have the broadcast archive there if you want to hear more about this interesting research. So I think that's something we'll hear about more as we get into this upcoming hurricane season as well. So when we look at the track of where hurricanes went last year, we had 14 named storms. They tended to be displaced a little bit to the east. We had a lot of fish storms just out over the open Atlantic, and we had a few storms in here by the southeastern U.S. impacting Florida and South Carolina. Several storms down here in the Caribbean as well. In general, the Gulf of Mexico was closed for business. We had no landfalling storms in Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, or Alabama. And that can be kind of expected. There's something called the North Atlantic Oscillation that really influences the track of hurricanes and tropical storms. We look at this is a climate index that has to do with the pressure patterns in the Atlantic. We look at the North Atlantic Oscillation for the months of May and June. And last year, we had an average, the combination of those 2 months was slightly positive. When we have a positive NAO, we tend to see the Bermuda High a little bit stronger and displaced to the northeast. And generally, we tend to see more of these hurricanes tracking out over the open Atlantic. And that is what we saw last year. So we were kind of not that surprised to see a lot of these storms out farther east and not impacting the U.S. mainland. By contrast, when you have a negative NAO phase, the Bermuda High tends to be a little bit weaker, displaced farther to the west, and we tend to see more of these storm tracks impacting the Caribbean, the Gulf, and really these areas farther west. This is more of a concern for us for hurricane impacts on the U.S. mainland. But again, these are just climate indices. They don't guarantee anything, but I was not that surprised to see this type of a pattern for where the storms went last year. You could see if you have a strong Bermuda high out here, you're not getting hurricanes tracking near Bermuda. Generally, that's happening when the Bermuda high is displaced off pretty far to the east. So the next slide here, wait, what is this? This is strange. Kansas City Chief Super Bowl. Oh, I'm sorry, folks. I think my computer was hacked. I'm sorry. I'm not even a Chiefs fan, but I have an idea who might have done this. Our videographer and the person behind the scenes today, Jeremiah Long, is a huge Chiefs fan. I think he might have hacked my computer. I'm sorry. I should have proofed this beforehand. I wasn't even rooting for the Chiefs on Sunday night. I grew up north of Philly, so I was pulling for the Eagles. So I promise in the future I will proof my slides before any presentation so I don't get hacked like that. Well, okay, let's get back to hurricanes now. We're talking about these patterns from last year. And, a lot of these storms stayed out to sea, but we all know what happened in Southwest Florida in late September. There's a saying that it only takes one. And what that means is we see these indices, these seasonal forecasts. How many hurricanes will there be? Where will they track? All of that is important. But again, it only takes one major hurricane hitting a highly populated area, and suddenly you have a high impact active hurricane season. And that's kind of what happened last year. Really, the big impact was Hurricane Ian. And we're going to talk about that. I was on the ground talking about Jeremiah Long. See, he took this picture right here. So maybe we can give him a shout out there to the Super Bowl Chiefs. Jeremiah and I were there on the ground. I was in the hurricane zone before, during, and after Hurricane Ian. Jeremiah came down with me a couple days after, and we were there really documenting what was happening on the ground there in Southwest Florida. So as you remember, if you were following, Hurricane Ian really started as a tropical storm in the Caribbean. Some of the early models, this was a forecast that came out on Saturday, and Ian made landfall on a Wednesday. It looked for a while that Ian might strengthen into a major hurricane and then track kind of west of Tampa, maybe make landfall north of Tampa, perhaps along the Panhandle or Appalachia Bay. But as you remember, as we went through time, this track started shifting farther to the east and farther to the south. By late Monday night, all of a sudden, it looked like Tampa Metro might be exactly in the crosshairs of the eye of Hurricane Ian. We knew it was going to be big wherever it hit, but the track kept on shifting farther to the east. And that kept happening over time. I actually got on the ground on Tuesday, the day before landfall. And when I got on the ground, I pulled up this map of the storm surge potential from the National Hurricane Center, really south of Longboat Key and kind of north of Bonita Beach. This includes really like Fort Myers up through Venice, Siesta Key, Sarasota. The Hurricane Center was predicting an 8 to 12 foot storm surge. That's a very scary forecast in a low-lying coastal zone that has not really been hit by a big surge. Again, 8 to 12 feet of storm surge is a big deal. I was on the ground driving around, and I was completely shocked. The day before landfall, I showed up with 10 days worth of food, 10 days of water, 10 days of gasoline. I thought I'd find a ghost town, and that's not at all what I found. This was driving around Venice, which is right in here in the middle of the red zone. I'm very close to the coastline here. I'm finding Italian restaurant open. If you want to get your nails done, you can do that. If you want to get a massage, you can do that. You could go to Publix the day before landfall until 6 p.m. And this is a major hurricane strike with 8 to 12 feet of storm surge forecast. I was shocked that everything was open. I didn't see a lot really boarded up. I know a lot of people have impact glass there, but still, just from talking to people and from seeing the amount of stuff that was completely opened, I could have been in Cleveland or Denver. I mean, there were not that many people, it appeared, that had left the coastal zone the day before a major hurricane strike. I was really surprised by that. And I started interacting with locals. This is a photograph of what some of the houses look like, very close. This is like 2 or 3 blocks from the beach in Venice, Florida. The ground elevation, maybe 5 feet. A lot of these houses are only elevated 1 or 2 feet. At this point, I'm expecting maybe 3 to 4 feet of fast-moving seawater in these houses. If they don't get swept away, it's going to be a lot of flood damage if you're fortunate enough to have a house left. I started interacting with locals, and I just couldn't believe it. Honestly, my blunt perspective, people seem pretty defiant, saying we've been here 35 years, we're not worried about it, we'll be fine. And I'm thinking, man, you may not survive this storm. And so I was really concerned just from the time I spent on the ground. But again, the tracks kept on shifting farther south, even through that Tuesday before landfall. And so I really want to document the storm, but I don't want to just film palm trees blowing in the wind. And so I really want to get to a place where I can document the wind and the coastal flood event. A little farther to the south, there was a place called Punta Gorda. This is getting a little closer to Fort Myers, and the National Hurricane Center was forecasting there could be as much as 9 feet of salt water above ground level in this area near Charlotte Harbor. I thought that would be a good place to document the wind and the storm surge. And the other good news, they have a parking garage there. I love parking garages when I'm documenting storms for 3 reasons. For one, over here on the left, this is in downtown Punta Gorda, there was a nice parking garage where I could get up above the floodwater. You do not want to mess around with hurricane storm surge. It will sweep your car away. If you're not elevated, you're in a lot of danger. And so I thought if I can get in a parking garage, I can get above the floodwater. Number 2, I can document the storm in 360 degrees. And number 3, I thought the other thing that's interesting about parking garages, I kind of feel like I'm hanging out with Craig Fowler because they always have the coolest sports cars. If you go to a hurricane parking garage, you feel like you're hanging out with Craig. You're seeing all these Porsches. It's like it's really interesting stuff. You see all kinds of interesting vehicles in these parking garages the day before a hurricane strike. So anyway, there it was. And when you're documenting these storms, you got to get in early. Sometimes the police shut off checkpoints. A lot of times these parking garages will completely cut off access. They'll block access, or even they'll just fill up. So you got to get there early. And then you have like 24 hours on the ground just to kind of walk around, talk to people, see how the community is prepared. I actually learned a lot about hurricane preparedness the day before a major hurricane strike. So I was walking around Punta Gorda that afternoon, learned a little bit of the hurricane history there. On this house that was boarded up, they have check marks there for Donna, check. Hurricane Charlie in 04, check. Wilma in 05, check. Hurricane Irma 2017, check that too. Ian, there's a question mark at this point. It's the day before landfall. They're just saying go away. That's a pretty interesting snapshot there of the hurricane history in Southwest Florida. So I was walking around documenting the water levels. This is really getting in the harbor there by Punta Gorda. Look at the water here by the right beam, by these structural beams over here. You can see it's in maybe a foot of water. This is the day before landfall. And then the morning of Ian, look at this, the water's pushed out. We had a pretty strong east wind that was pushing the water away from shore. This is Tuesday afternoon. This is Wednesday morning. The water's pushed out. Do the same thing here. I took this picture Tuesday afternoon, and then with the offshore wind, this is Wednesday morning. The water's pushed out. People get really fascinated by these negative storm surges. During Hurricane Irma, there was so much talk about it, like Tampa Bay ran dry. People were asking, is the eye sucking the water offshore? There were a lot of articles in high-profile newspapers. What is happening to cause the water to go from this to this? Well, again, these shallow bays, these harbors, they're very responsive to the wind direction. If you get a broad wind field pushing offshore, you get a negative storm surge. The water actually can drain out of the bay or the harbor, but conversely, if you get a strong onshore wind, the water can come in that quickly as well. And so I saw a lot of that. I was walking around. I love seeing flood mitigation strategies before a storm. It shows people are taking it seriously. They're taking precaution. This is not the kind of thing you can just throw up in a day. You can tell that they prepared. There were these flood barriers that were installed. This is right below the parking deck on the shops there. I looked closely. I could not find a manufacturer for this type of flood barrier, but they were like bolted in to these clamps on the wall. If you're interested to know what these what system they're using here, I could track that business and contact them. It's one thing to go to a workshop or a convention or a conference and hear someone talk about their latest flood protection product. It's another thing to get there on the day before a major hurricane and see people actually implementing these things on the ground. And so that to me shows, okay, people will have confidence in this if they're investing the money in it. Again, I could contact them and find out what system this was. It was really well secured if we got the big storm surge that was forecast. But again, the Hurricane Center was saying up to 9 feet of salt water above ground level. The level of that flood barrier might be 4 feet. So I was wondering, will that be high enough? And I was waiting to see what would happen. So here, I like to do measurements as well. Back in the day, I tried to measure wind. That's really hard to do. They have handheld anemometers. They're not very accurate. And then you actually have to go out there with debris whizzing by your ear. I don't really like taking wind measurements anymore. A barometer is a way to go. It's measuring air pressure. It tells me if the storm's still approaching. And also, it's really interesting to have different chasers out there and different instruments out there showing what the minimum air pressure is. The lower the air pressure, the stronger the storm. I was there in the parking garage calibrating my barometer, and all of a sudden, this guy came up to me. He said, "Are you a storm chaser?" I said, "Yeah, I guess so. I'm a hurricane scientist." And he introduced himself. So this was an interesting guy. He said, "I have a barometer too," and he was going to get it. He was also a hurricane. This guy was a scientist with NOAA, and he was just obsessed with hurricanes. And he said, "Let me get out my barometer, and we can calibrate our barometers together." So typically, the state-of-the-art barometer today is a handheld digital device. Jose Garcia went to his trunk and he pulled out the kind of barometer my grandma used to have hanging on her wall, the kind where you tap the glass. I thought this was the coolest thing. It's totally old school. But this was measuring in inches. I was measuring in millibars. You can convert them. And I got to know this guy. He grew up in Puerto Rico. He works for NOAA in Silver Spring, Maryland, near their headquarters there. He's obsessed with hurricanes. He's been going into hurricanes since 2004. He's been in all kinds of hurricanes, documenting them, and he drove through the night on prayers, loud music, and Red Bull, straight from Maryland, without sleeping, to show up in the parking garage with us in Punta Gorda. I really enjoyed documenting the storm with him and a guy named John. We set up our cameras, and again, his barometer almost perfectly matched mine. My lowest pressure was 954 millibars, which I don't know what it would be in inches, but our barometers were matching almost perfectly. So it was fun there to document with Jose Garcia there in Punta Gorda. So in the first half of the storm, the winds were building up. We got into the eye wall for about an hour and a half. The winds were out of the east. We had, I would say, Cat 2 winds probably out of the east. And Jeremiah, if you could show this clip to everyone of what this looked like while we saw the Cat 2 winds come in before the eye reached us in Punta Gorda, Florida during Hurricane Ian. I'm thinking you're seeing the video here. I can't see it on my end, but I'll continue here. Actually, let me just let that video play out.
Hey, Hal, you're good to go. That video played
Okay,
out.
thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. So those were, pretty much Cat 2 winds out of the east. So, chasing a hurricane like Ian, it's a little bit, we just had the Super Bowl this last week where we had an hour and 15 minutes of intense football, and then you get a 45-minute halftime show. Well, during Hurricane Ian, the halftime show was the eye of the hurricane came right over us for about 45 minutes. So again, I'm really fascinated by the saltwater flooding. I used the halftime show to go down to the harbor. I went down to Charlotte Harbor, and I was shocked by what I saw. Ian, the east winds had pushed the water out of the harbor, and so the harbor ran dry. Boats were on their side. It was a crazy thing. And when I was standing there, I noticed about 60 yards out, there was something moving on the dry seabed of Charlotte Harbor. I was curious what it is. I went out there, and sure enough, there were these big fish that were stranded in 6 inches of water. And I actually picked one up. I could have, if I had a propane stove, I could have brought it back to the parking garage and had dinner that night. So these fish were stranded. And the other thing I saw, which was really interesting, this pole, the barnacles went up about 6.5 feet. So the salt water pushed out a good 6.5 feet from in Charlotte Harbor there. Again, we were getting an east wind. It was kind of pushing these waters offshore, and seeing these sailboats on their side. It was really something to see. Then I realized, I really need to get back to the shore. I'm in the eye of a Category 4 hurricane. But at that moment, I actually started sinking pretty quickly. There's this black goo that's all in these harbors. And so I got all this black goo that came in over my knees. There was like a moment where I actually was stuck, and I realized this is not a good place to be. I'm in the eye of a Cat 4 hurricane, 60 yards offshore, but stuck in these sediments. I was able to get back to shore and wash. This is all goo. I'm not wearing pants. There's this black goo. I was able to wash it off and then get back to the parking garage. And the take-home message I learned from here, and I was talking to Craig about this last week. If you get one take-home message from this whole presentation today, the next time you're in the eye of a Cat 4 hurricane, standing on the edge of a bay or harbor, do not walk out 60 yards into the black gooey sediment to see what's moving around on the dry seabed. Just don't do it. Avoid the temptation. Take it from me, you don't want to get out there. If you learn any message from this presentation today, don't go out into the bay by yourself during a Cat 4 hurricane eye. That's the best we can do. I think everyone would agree that's good advice. I was actually very fortunate in that the eye came directly overhead, and so it did not really push a big surge into the bay. Incidentally, the forecast coming, the day before, this is out of CIRA at LSU. This is using data from the day before. Now, actually, what happened is the eye came right over the bay. But the day before, the forecast is that the eye would have been about 15 miles farther north. Just a 15-mile difference in the track. This whole bay would have been getting strong winds coming off from the southwest. And again, forecast to put maybe 8 or 9 feet of salt water into Punta Gorda. As it happened, Punta Gorda actually got no storm surge damage. The surge damage was farther to the south, down by Sanibel Island, Fort Myers Beach, and Naples and Fort Myers itself. So, but what we did see, I got back to the parking garage with about 10 minutes to spare. And then it was like all hell broke loose. We got hit by the second eye wall here, this southern part. And actually, the second eye wall was way more intense than the first one. If we could run maybe 30 seconds of that clip right now, just to show you what it looked like in the Category 4 winds of Hurricane Ian. Guys, that's probably good. We don't even need to play the whole thing.
The clip is over. Looked like a scene out of Twister.
Yeah, it was okay. I'm back with y'all. Y'all, that was really intense. So Jose Garcia, again, NOAA scientist, he's been in hurricanes since 2004. He has a really good feel on wind speeds. He was convinced that those were sustained winds between 130 and 135. Those are Cat 4 winds, y'all. That's very catastrophic. Once you get to Cat 4, you can see substantial catastrophic failure of walls, failures of roofs. Even if you don't get a storm surge, that kind of wind damage is really high end. And that's what was going on. Again, the second eye wall was worse than the first one. So the next morning I got up, started driving around. I was surprised in Punta Gorda by how well, in general, the roofs did. There was certainly a lot of wind damage, but a lot of the roofs did surprisingly well. And part of that story is Hurricane Charlie in 2004 hit the same area, almost the same exact landfall point, also as a Cat 4 hurricane. I think the winds were around 145. And so a lot of people built back even better after Charlie. We heard stories of people building better roofs after they got hit by Charlie in 2004. And so I was surprised how many roofs did really well. But of course, there was certainly structural damage, which you're going to find anytime you have Cat 4 winds. When we got farther south, like between Punta Gorda and Fort Myers, I came across a few subdivisions that were not built as well. And you could really see what Cat 4 winds can do on substandard building codes. I mean, if you did not really build for a major hurricane strike, we saw a lot of high-end wind damage in some areas. So again, it really showed me there's a lot to be said on how you build in your construction. We saw some houses that looked like they weren't scratched and others that were completely annihilated. So getting a little farther into Fort Myers, getting to, say, the southern part of Fort Myers, we saw the wind damage and then the surge damage as well. In these areas, Fort Myers Beach, Sanibel Island, some of these areas right along the beach were, whole houses were just completely washed away. We could not access those points. The bridges were closed. But even in the southern end of Fort Myers, a lot of storm surge damage. And just going through some of these pictures, if you were on the field, if you were adjusting, these scenes may look familiar to you. Some of these subdivisions took at least 48 hours just to get in. The saltwater stayed up for a while. Again, a lot of flood damage. We saw boats on dry ground. abandoned cars. You wonder if people survived it. And even this is a subdivision in the southern part of Fort Myers. And over here, even in this neighborhood, a lot of the roofs did pretty well, but you start seeing people's possessions stacked up by the curbside. So when you see that they had usually substantial amount of storm surge in the house. And so you can listen to our GeoTrek podcast. We have done about 65 podcasts now where we get on the ground. We talk about these stories, the stories behind extreme weather and their impacts. Episodes number 48 and 49 were recorded on the ground in Hurricane Ian. It's very raw. It's a lot of very action-packed episodes if you want to learn more about what it was like on the ground, and a lot of interviews with storm survivors, what they learned, maybe how they built better in the past, or how they're going to prepare better in the future. Well, let's get into the storm stats. I know some people really love the numbers. Hurricane Ian storm stats. It made landfall in Cayo Costa, Florida, just kind of to the northwest there of Fort Myers. Maximum sustained winds were 150. It's tied for the 5th all-time strongest hurricane on record to make landfall in the U.S. It was an upper-level Cat 4 hurricane. If you're keeping score, the year before, there was a upper Cat 4, also 150 miles an hour. That was Hurricane Ida in southeast Louisiana. The year before that, there was also a 150 mile an hour landfall in southwest Louisiana, Hurricane Laura. This is 3 years in a row we've had a hurricane make landfall somewhere along the Gulf Coast with maximum sustained winds of 150 miles an hour. Some more stats. Ian produced the highest wind speed of any hurricane during the last hurricane season. Before landfall, the winds actually maxed out at 155 miles an hour. Storm surge, we think around 12 to 16 feet. We're still waiting for the official reports to come out, and we'll be adding those to USurge. Again, the flood information systems in CNC, we run USurge, where we're documenting really the flood history all along the Atlantic and Gulf Coast since the mid-1800s. So we'll add that to our database once the official numbers come out. Some impacts from Hurricane Ian, estimated more than 100 fatalities. And as Jeremiah and I will tell you when we were on the ground, it was 6 days after landfall. And you can hear in our podcast, sometimes our audio is drowned out by Chinook helicopters still trying to rescue and recover bodies. And so there were a lot of missing people, and the numbers may still even be rising. Unfortunately, this was a very violent, catastrophic storm. We think at least 100 fatalities. It's the deadliest Florida hurricane since the Labor Day hurricane of 1935. Economically, more than $50 billion in losses, making it the 7th costliest U.S. hurricane. And this helped last hurricane season finish with over $53 billion in losses for the 6th all-time in hurricane season damage. Remember what we were saying before. July and August were since July 4th to August 31st, completely silent. No named storms. The entire month of August, not a named storm, and we finished in 6th place. Again, it only takes one. If you take Ian out of the mix, last year's kind of a non-event year in a sense. But you put one huge storm like that, and all of a sudden you're in the top 10 of all-time hurricane losses. CNC, as always, was on the scene, on the ground before, during, and after. I appreciate Murphy Buggs, property claims manager, giving us these numbers. CNC was involved with over 16,000 original claims, not counting supplements. We had 175 field adjusters out there on the field, 125 desk adjusters, and 50 file reviewers. That's not to include all of the support staff, all of the people that come together. I mean, we work really well as a team, and I know a lot of people were working 6-7 days a week for weeks or months after this type of event, doing their best to help people get their feet on the ground. Again, a huge thank you to the entire CNC family. This was a huge response, y'all, and I really appreciate that, just seeing all of you out there just working in so many different capacities to help with the recovery and really help people get their lives together after this type of event. Really cool to see such a big response from CNC. Well, the last two things I want to share in this presentation, before we get to a brief look at the 2023 hurricane season, I want to share a top 4 list on why Hurricane Ian may have really inflicted such severe impacts. And again, this could be even like a top 8 or top 10 list. I'll do a top 4 today. Number 1, misunderstanding the long-term hurricane climatology of South Florida. When a lot of people think about the long-term weather and the long-term climate in South Florida, they have one picture in their mind, and this is it. It's the Sunshine State, right? Beautiful weather year-round. It's a great place to be, great weather. And a lot of people think this is a guarantee 365 days a year. and may not realize some things about the hurricane climatology of South Florida. I mapped out here tracks of the 6 major hurricanes. These are category 3, 4, and 5 over the past 50 years. There have been 6, including Ian. These are the tracks. Since really 1973 to present, there have been 6 major hurricanes. That's about 1 major hurricane, at least category 3, every 8 years on average. But if you go back to the 50 years before that, it looks like this. And we had 12 major hurricanes. And so that's about a major hurricane every 4 years. And in fact, if you look at these numbers, this runs from 1923 to 1972. All of these storms happened between 1926 and 1965. That's a 40-year period, 1926 to 1965, with 12 major hurricanes. That's a major hurricane category 3 or above on average every 3.3 years. The 20s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, very hyperactive decades in the hurricane climatology of South Florida. And so Hurricane Ian comes along and these other storms like Irma, and people start saying maybe this is climate change. Well, that's a complex topic. We can get into it, but a lot of people think it's unusual to get a major hurricane in South Florida. When you look back farther into the record and you see periods like this, I mean, look at this. We had 12 major hurricanes in 40 years, and then from 1966 until 1991, we have 25, 26 years where there were no major hurricanes. You see nothing on this list from 1966 to 1991. That includes the 70s, that includes the 80s. 2 decades where the population just exploded in South Florida. So people started thinking it's normal not to have major hurricanes. And without knowing their deeper history, all of a sudden when Irma and Ian and these other storms show up, they're like, what's going on? Is this climate change? Again, it's more than we can cover in this presentation. But my point here is when you know the deeper history of South Florida, maybe what's really unusual is 1966 to 1991. And maybe we should be thinking, this is not every day in South Florida. Major hurricane strikes in South Florida are a normal part of the climatology. And a lot of people either forgot that or just never knew it. Or they moved there in the 70s and they're like, my first 20 years here, I never saw anything. And now all of a sudden they're getting hit. So that's my number 4 reason. A lot of people misunderstanding the hurricane climatology of South Florida and also misunderstanding storm surge vulnerability. Hurricane Charlie hit in a very similar landfall location as Hurricane Ian, but it did not produce a big surge because it was geographically small. It was intensifying. It was moving through quickly. And that's the other thing. A lot of people in this area have not really experienced a big surge before. Number 3 reason, anchoring. This is pretty simple. When you see a track like this 4 days before landfall, a lot of people see that track and they do something called anchoring. They just start thinking, okay, I live in Fort Myers. I'm focused on my granddaughter's birthday party coming up. It looks like the hurricane's going north of Tampa. That's good news. And then they just check out. They turn off the media. They don't stay in tune with the forecast. They get anchored in their mind the first message they see, which says it's going north of Tampa. And then a few days later, the track changes to this, and they may be caught off guard. And so this anchoring thing is a real problem. People get in their mind a first forecast they see, and they need to be reminded to stay in touch. Every really good meteorologist with Hurricane Ian was saying the models are in disagreement. There's a lot of uncertainty. This track may move substantially. And so people really needed to stay tuned for track shifts. We expected they would happen. We didn't know if it would shift west or shift east. It ended up shifting east. But again, people get anchored on the first message. They think this is signed, sealed, and delivered, and it's not. And that's a second reason, really, why that's number 3 on my list here of why this may have been such a big impact. Number 2, and this is something that I had never really encountered before, not believing the surge forecast or not connecting the forecast with a new reality. And we're going to get into this video clip. Jeremiah and I interviewed this guy, Carl, after the storm. Just what he says here is really profound and very eye-opening.
Going to rise 12 to 16 feet from that level out there. I would have never have believed it in a million years. But it went from that level down there right to that trim board up there on the deck. We were only 4 to 6 inches short of it flooding the living area of the upstairs. I never in my lifetime would have believed that that water would have come up that far. Never. But seeing is believing, and I saw it.
Thanks, guys. I can hear you now. Yeah, seeing is believing, and I saw. So we had this other phenomenon where the forecast was accurate sometimes and just didn't believe it. I think in part, a lot of people said, I've been through hurricanes for 30 years, but this is just completely outside their frame of reference, that the water could rise that high. They just, in some cases, just simply did not believe it. This last story, this is a really hard story for me to tell. I came across the story of a guy named Mitch who lived in Fort Myers Beach. He was called the mayor of Fort Myers Beach. He wasn't the official mayor. He was just, everybody loved him. He was a very friendly guy, and he stayed for the storm. This is a Facebook post from the day of landfall. It's 8 o'clock in the morning, and he posted a split screen. The top part of the screen shows his street at 8 o'clock in the morning, wet roads, no storm surge yet. And his comment was, hopefully didn't make a bad decision to stay. 8 a.m., 40-mile-an-hour wind so far. Bottom of the split screen shows a local meteorologist accurately forecasting 12 to 16 feet of storm surge for his area. Again, the ground elevation here might be, 4 or 5 feet? We're talking maybe 8 to 10 feet of salt water pushing into these homes. This is a very terrifying forecast to see. So he posted this on social media, on Facebook, the day of landfall. And then through the day, you see updates. Early afternoon, he updates, so sad to see the bar floating with the bar stools down to the bay. Over the mailbox, who knew, our worst ever? Our generator floated away. So he's providing updates. The storm surge arrived. It's coming into the house. And then like mid-afternoon, there's an update that says, okay, we're terrified. And then that's it. That's his last post ever. He drowned in the storm surge. And it's, when I heard the story, it's just traumatic. I mean, you're seeing someone documenting the last day of their life, documenting the storm, but they didn't survive it. And what's so traumatic about this story to me is that the forecasters accurately predicted the surge. They broadcast it. It reached the audience. And this poor guy, Mitch, he not only saw the forecast, he took a screenshot of it and shared it. So the accurate forecast reached the audience, but somehow it didn't connect that this is life-threatening, like this may not be survivable. And I want to say something. For 15 years, I've been going into hurricane zones. I want to document the physical aspects, but I really want to interact socially as well. But I don't do that to shame people. I don't do that to slap people on the wrist or say they should have made a different decision. Evacuation is a very complex thing. There are a lot of good reasons why people do not evacuate. It's something we're all trying to understand. But again, here, there was something going on with this storm of people not believing the forecast or not connecting the forecast with this reality that 12 to 16 feet is not just a number. Like when you understand what that means, that's 8 to 10 feet of salt water rapidly pushing into your community. It may not be survivable. Check out, and this is a picture that a storm survivor provided with me. Again, this is, in this case, maybe 5, 6 feet of salt water moving quickly into these homes. Survivors were happy to tell us their stories, and every survivor said how terrifying it was and that they'll never stay again. Check out this podcast that I did with Rob Perillo. He's an award-winning meteorologist in South Louisiana. And we talk about anchoring, but he talks a lot about humanizing weather forecasts. It's not enough just to say how many inches of rain or how many feet of storm surge or how many miles an hour the wind will be. We need to tie that with really visual pictures of what this means in your neighborhood. Check out this GeoTrek podcast number 57 with Rob Perillo. I learned a lot from Rob, and I think for our messaging, this is not just for meteorologists. If you work in disaster science, insurance, deploying people into harm's way, these are all messages that are really important for all of us. Check out a GeoTrek podcast episode 57 with Rob Perillo. Really get into that. Well, here we are at the number one reason why Ian may have inflicted such severe impacts. I feel terrible for doing this, but I'll explain where I'm coming from. Actually, I'm going to share this reason at the CNC Connect conference, May 2nd to 4th in Mobile, Alabama. And I'm not trying to be a jerk, but there is a major overview, an oversight, a major fault in how we perceive hurricanes, how we forecast them, and how we communicate this. It's a deep topic, deeper than I have time to get into today, but I'll say I completely pivoted on how I forecast and communicate hurricanes last hurricane season. And I'm going to be sharing about that at my talk at CNC Connect in Mobile, May 2nd to the 4th. I think that there are some really different ways and improved ways that we can communicate about hurricane risk. And this is something that I'm going to be talking about. So again, check that out. It's an important thing, and I think that this could have ramifications for many hurricane seasons to come. As the guys were saying, as Craig was saying before the broadcast, it's only $99 to come to this conference. And the whole theme of my talk at CNC Connect will be this number one reason why I think people get blindsided by hurricanes and how we can improve both our forecasting and our messaging as well. Well, I'm going to wrap up this presentation with what to expect this hurricane season. And a lot of times when we look at hurricane season forecast, the long-term forecast, we look at sea surface temperatures. In the Atlantic, they're running warm. The main development region, MDR, is running warmer than normal. And this is normal. This really runs in a cycle of 2 to 4 decades, something called the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation. The Atlantic's been running warm since 1995, so I'm not surprised to see it running warm in the sea surface temperature map from this week. We also look at the equatorial Pacific. When it's blue, like it is right now, we're in La Nina. That typically means more hurricane activity in the Atlantic. So again, if we see yellows and reds in the El Nino box there, it means less hurricanes in general in the Atlantic. If we see blue in the equatorial Pacific, it means more Atlantic hurricanes in general. But what's going to happen going into this hurricane season? Well, when we look back at El Nino, remember I said in the Atlantic, it stays more cold for typically 2 to 4 decades. In the Pacific, it's very different. It often stays in El Nino mode, which is red, or La Nina mode, which is blue, for like 1 to 3 years. And the last 2 to 3 years, we've been in a pretty strong La Nina, including last hurricane season, which is why they thought it would be so hyperactive. What do we think going into this hurricane season? Well, our friends at Columbia University plotted this graph of the models. We're saying right now we have equal chances of neutral and La Nina, but look at the red show up on this. And this is in 3-month blocks. ASO means August, September, October. The best models right now are predicting that most likely will be in El Nino or neutral conditions getting into the heart of the upcoming hurricane season. That in general would tend to reduce hurricane activity in the Atlantic, but then again, the Atlantic sea surface temperatures are running warmer than normal. Combining those together, again, this is not actually my area of expertise. I did not do a PhD on this or anything. I would guess that the forecasters are going to say it's going to be a near normal season going ahead to next year, but I could be wrong. Come to the National Tropical Weather Conference in South Padre Island in April. You can hear Phil Klotzbach. He's really the guru on all this stuff. He'll be giving the latest updated long-range forecast there in mid-April in South Padre Island. So if I had to guess, if my life depended on it, I would say we could expect a near normal season coming up to next year. Again, everyone, my name is Dr. Hal Needham. Some people call me Hurricane Hal. I'm an extreme weather and disaster scientist with CNC, Flood Information Systems, and the GeoTrek project. There's my phone number. You can shoot me a text, give me a call, shoot me an email. I love interacting about these things. You can go to geotrek.com or floodinformationsystems.com to find out more about what we're up to. And again, if this wet your whistle and you want more information, check out our GeoTrek podcast. We're getting into all these topics in depth. Last year we were doing weekly podcasts, so we've covered a lot of ground, and there's a lot that you can learn in that as well. Everyone, thanks for your attention, and hopefully we have time for a couple questions now as well.
Hey, Hal, thanks for that information. It's always good to hear about what 2022 was like and kind of the information from that, and then also leading into like 2023. I believe we do have some comments, some questions, and I'm gonna get started here real quick. So, because I do want to set the record straight. You showed a parking garage with a few vehicles in it, and I just want to make sure everybody's aware that those are not my vehicles. What you did not show was my 1987 Yugo. And next time we can show that to everybody, just kind of show my car that I actually drive. And also another thing to point out is it's during the hurricane season we're all working. It's not 6 or 7 days a week. It's actually 10 days a week is what we're actually working. So, and it's kind of interesting how we can squeeze another 3 days worth of time into a week. And I know there's one of our examiners complains about that all the time. If we just gave her more time, So, we completely understand what she goes through because we're out there pushing and trying to help these policyholders and spending is 7 a.m. or 6 or 7 a.m. to 4 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes it seems it's always we're out there just doing our best. Now, you were talking about the 2023 season. And just a little quick information about that. You're talking about it being a near normal season, but one of the observations that we have that I have, even in a near normal season, it only takes that one event, like we've seen over the last couple of years. That one event is all it takes. And kind of leaning into that, you mentioned something about silent August. And I've seen a pattern myself, and I'm not a meteorologist. I'm just, a weather guy and always looking at the weather, see what's happening and stuff. But I've seen a pattern. To me, it seems that August has become more of a slow season in a sense. It seems to me that storms are being pushed further and further out. Like the seasons are changing. Like you're starting to see development, you don't see it kind of in August and September during the kind of the peak sometimes. It really starts developing more at the end of the peak and further into October. Are you seeing this similar pattern, and do you any reason why that's happening, or am I just assuming things and trying to make things happen that are actually not there?
Well, Craig, I love that question, and it does fit with what we've been seeing in recent years, right? I mean, like last year, things were pretty quiet as far as impacts until Ian, the last week of September. Look at 2018, Hurricane Michael, Cat 5 hurricane coming in around like October 10th, right? So, I haven't actually studied it academically to see if there is an actual trend there, but it does seem like we're getting a lot of these higher end impacts kind of in the second half of the season. I think the climatological midpoint of hurricane season is around September 10th. And I think you can make an argument. It seems like we're getting a lot of these bigger storms in the second half. So, that may relate back to the Kansas City Chiefs who got so great in the second half of the Super Bowl.
True.
Hey, I'm just giving props to Jeremiah here. He helps me out all the time.
True.
So that's the only thing I could come up with right now, but it's something to look into for sure.
And I wonder if it has something to do with the Sahara dust coming through. Because, it seems like more and more, like you said, this. I mean, I remember seeing sunsets in Mobile in July and August that were just absolutely beautiful. And it was like, oh, it's the dust. It's the dust from the Sahara. And you're thinking, that's so far away. So I wonder if that's like preventing some of these developments. And then all of a sudden it clears, the environment's right, but it's just taking a while for it to actually get out. Normally, it's out maybe sometime around August or September. Now it's just taking a little bit longer. I don't know. Yeah. I just watch these things, watch these patterns. It just seems like the seasons to me are just changing. They're shifting. They're becoming more and more later. If you want to reference that. So that was just one of my observations.
So something else to think about. Usually early in the season, like June, early July, the storms are more forming in the Western Caribbean and the Gulf. Usually the later season storms are happening. They're forming deeper in the Caribbean and farther out. These are the storms tracking off of Africa as well. So those, the dry air in June and July, and the water temps aren't warm enough out there yet. So they're coming from different source regions as well, early in the season versus late. But it's an interesting thing you mentioned. And I remember looking at that list of quiet August. 1961 is mentioned on that. Hurricane Carla was a horrific storm in 1961. That August also was silent. So sometimes it can happen that August is really quiet, but it doesn't mean that September will be quiet.
Yeah. And that's one of the observations you said, one of the 4 points. I think a lot of people let their guard down too. August comes along, it's gone. Everybody goes, oh, we're good, we're safe. We dodged a bullet, and the next thing you know, we have a storm. I mean, think like Dorian and other things.
Yeah.
If they actually hit where they were projected at a certain point, it would have been an absolute devastation for Florida on the east and west coast. I mean, if it hit Tampa, but that's kind of leads to my next question. You heard in the media that a lot of meteorologists and news crews set up in Tampa. And they waited the storm thinking it was going to hit Tampa. Then, obviously, we saw what happened. It went way south of Tampa. Did they just have bad data, or just they were too afraid to go down and get in the middle of the storm like you did? I mean, do you have an observation on that? Or
I think there was so much talk about Tampa because Tampa has been very, very lucky for a long time, right? And so when we talk about a major hurricane coming in near or north of Tampa, the scale of that could be like unseen in American history. I mean, that could put a 15, 18-foot surge in Tampa Bay. I think people were catching on to the potential impact there, but you have to be quick on your feet. These storms do change. Tampa got very lucky again with this. I think maybe people were latching on to the potential huge impacts, but we can't forget really all along the Florida coast, it's pretty well developed, right? I mean, it's a it's an attractive place to live. People want to be there. There's a lot of, Tampa would have been a bigger impact, but still Fort Myers is huge.
Yeah.
And so the forecast was changing around, and you have to really stay tuned with the latest update on a storm like this.
Well, it's interesting. You're in, what was it, Charlotte Harbor, where the water got sucked out. Well, that water has to go somewhere. So, it's being pushed somewhere at some point. So it's interesting that people set up shop one where, but the storm possibly, the damages probably are happening somewhere else. And I know that's probably part of your number one. So, and I really wanted to find out more information about your number one, but you're just going to leave me hanging. So I will absolutely 100% be at CNC Connect, just really so I could hear what this is all about. Because I know you've teased me before with this, and it really excited me at the time when you said, "Oh, here's the forecast is completely changed," and so now I'm really excited to hear about that. But anyway, David, I think David has a few questions, and I believe Julie has a few comments or questions that are dropped in the chat box.
Yeah, you answered one of them. I was going to ask if you shared if you took him on a ride in the Lambo or the Corvette.
I think that was a Corvette. I think that was a yellow Corvette.
You answered that. You don't play very
At least
nice.
it was not a little red Corvette.
One of the videos that I saw really stood out for me, and it leads kind of into one of the topics that we have on the agenda. Is you said we looked at the winds going down that street, and I was looking at the house and the roofs, and I didn't see a lot of debris in that one. You saw a piece of siding wrapped around a pole, but then versus you made the comment after Charlie hit the same area, folks went in and rebuilt a little bit better versus the areas that didn't, and you saw those houses that were destroyed. So I just thought that was a real good way to show.
Yeah, and David, some of those pictures of immaculate roofs with no damage, they were very close to where I filmed those Cat 4 winds. I mean, I was surprised. It just shows how well you can endure a hurricane if you really build for it.
Right.
That was one of the big take-home messages for me.
I wonder if those were the fortified homes. I wonder if that's part of that program.
Could be.
We'll find out.
Could be.
We'll find out one of our claims corner
episodes
coming up.
That's right. That's all I had. Julie, are there any
Yeah,
questions? I'm sorry, go ahead.
One last thing I wanted to address, Craig, when you mentioned the water going out of that harbor, just as easily as it went out of Charlotte Harbor, it was coming in to Naples and Sanibel and Fort Myers Beach. It's just the water's very responsive. I thought I was setting up to where there'd be a big surge, and there wasn't. Again, the tracks kept on shifting. But as easily as 7 feet of water pushed out, there could have been 7 feet of water pushing in. And so it's a very dangerous, really the world's most deadly and destructive natural hazard is those saltwater floods in a hurricane. It's a very, very dangerous hazard. Julie?
Hey, Hal, I just had one question from someone. They wanted to know if you knew what the black goo was.
That's a great question. You know what? In retrospect, I thought about this. I've seen other coastal environments along the Gulf Coast where if you dig down, if you get a kid out there on a sunny day with a building a sandcastle, sometimes just a couple inches down, you get this black goo. I would need to look into biologically what that is, but it exists, but it's very soft. And it did get me thinking, honestly, if anyone's out there in a storm situation, be very careful. It's very soft and you can sink down really quickly. I don't know what it is. It had a strong smell to it. And at the point I was like, I just want to get out of here, get back to the parking garage.
Yeah.
Hope it wasn't like a sewer smell or anything. Hope it was actually.
No, it is natural. I think it comes because if you think about it, that harbor is underwater like 365 days a year for maybe 10 years or 30 years. It really has been exposed, So this was actually pushing salt water out of an entire bay. So it's really rare that you would have the sediments exposed, and so it's like the bay bottom basically.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we can't wait to hear about your topic coming up at the conference in May. And, besides Hal presenting at the conference and having a topic, we do have other great speakers like Jay Adams with Chief of Claims and Citizens. We have a couple of FEMA reps that will be down there as well, and some other reps from OST. And we're looking for a really fantastic conference. So we can't wait to see you and everybody else down there. We also can't wait to see y'all in 2 weeks for our next Claims Corner. Is that right, David?
That's right.
Before we close, I do want to say one quick thing. I do want to actually thank, this is our first, we're in our new booth here. We've got all this set up. It's taken a lot of time. I do want to thank our media team, Ashley, Amy, Chris, Jeremiah, Seneth, for all the effort they've put into this, all the hours and stuff. They've really done a fantastic job getting us into this booth area here. We've done such a fantastic job. We're like, we need to expand it. Just great. We're going bigger. So we might have before the end of the season, we may have a brand new, even a better booth. But yeah, they've done a fantastic job just putting all this together. And then also want to thank Julie and Mandy as well for all the stuff they've done with the Claims Corner, the registrations, everything else, and just getting everybody lined up for this. So if it wasn't for that team and for everybody else involved, we couldn't sit up here and do what we do and hopefully get some really good information out to you all. So,
Right.
David,
Right.
all for you. I'm done.
Are you going to thank me?
Oh, and I want to thank David.
Okay.
Not sure what for, but
Okay.
thank you, David.
You're welcome. Thank you. In all seriousness, though, thanks for being here, Hal. It was a lot of good information.
Thanks, y'all, for having me, and I'm excited to hear the other speakers this season of Claims Corner.
Yeah. A couple of reminders for everybody. Number one, Craig mentioned it earlier, but March 2nd, Jay Dykstra from Alpine Intel. He's going to speak about HVAC lightning and surge claim-related cases. Always a good topic and good information.
It's in 2 weeks, right?
Yes, 2 weeks.
Be here before we know it.
The other, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, CNC Catastrophe and National Claims, if you haven't already. You can go on there. You can look at our past episodes. This one will be on there. Connect with us, and we'd love to see the activity. So with that being said, I think we're done. So
Yep.
we'll look forward to seeing everybody in 2 weeks.
Thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Bye,
Have a great
guys.
day.
Bye, Hal.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.